Good afternoon, and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you're new to the channel, hello and welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. If you could give this video a like and comment with your thoughts down below, that would be much appreciated as it helps the channel to grow. And if you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and click that red button because I make more content like this, and hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I post because I'm bad at keeping a regular schedule. Today, we are discussing 3 missing persons whose last confirmed sightings were on CCTV footage. Let's get into it. Number 1. Ivana Viatrek. In the summer of 2010, 19-year-old Ivana Viatrek was on the cusp of starting a new chapter. The teenager from Gdansk, Poland, had completed high school and was waiting to hear back from her university applications and was planning a trip to Spain. On the night of July 16, 2010, Ivana went out to a popular club called the Dream Club in Sopot, Poland. She was with her friend Andrea and 3 of Andrea's male friends, Paweł, Marek, and Adrian. According to a witness at the club, Ivana and her friends seemed to be having a good time. But then Ivana and Adria got into a fight. Ivana reportedly left to cool off before returning to the club in a bad mood. Her friends claimed that the fight started for no particular reason, though investigators believe it was brought on by Ivana's discovery her recent ex-boyfriend was partying with other girls in the area. She and her friends then got into another fight, and although her friend tried to stop her, she left the club to walk home alone. Ivana was last seen on surveillance footage captured on a camera at 4:12 a.m. She was walking along a seafront promenade just south of Sopot and was passing the 63rd beach entrance. In the video, Ivana is walking alone, barefoot, and at a brisk pace. Once she leaves the frame, though, she's never seen again. While her home is still 2 kilometers from where the footage was captured, some stretches of her route had no working cameras. According to phone records, Ivana sent text and received calls earlier in the night, but her phone died at 3:49 a.m. with no activity after that. On her way home, Ivana reportedly spoke with Andrea and made amends from their earlier fight. Ivana asked Andrea if she could spend the night at her apartment. Andrea was already home and she left the keys outside for Ivana to let herself in, which was a common occurrence for the girls. But the next morning, there was no sign of Ivana, and the keys were still outside. Andrea assumed that Ivana may have gone home after all, but when she called Ivana's mother later that day, she told her that she hadn't seen or heard from her either. Ivana was reported missing, and the search for her began. Police emergency team members, community members, and rescue dogs searched the area repeatedly, with no results. Her family and friends even asked for help from a famous Polish psychic, Krzysztof Jakowski, but he couldn't determine where she was. It would become one of Poland's most highly publicized and mysterious missing persons cases, drawing nationwide attention, public scrutiny, and countless theories. The national media coverage of the case ended up doing more harm than good, as the police received an overwhelming number of reports related to Ivana. Criminals even started reporting their enemies to the police in connection with her disappearance, and others extorted ransom from her family. The prime suspect in the case comes from the surveillance footage of Ivana. In the video, there's a man wearing a light shirt and a towel draped over his shoulders, who's staggering while walking behind Ivana. Internet sleuths looking into the case, of which there are many, started referring to the man as the Towel. The man is seen following Ivana out of frame, and then the same cameras capture the man returning at 6:22 a.m. with the same towel, but no shirt on. While police tried to identify the man, they could never confirm his identity or that he had any contact with Ivana. Some of the public began to suspect her friends, but investigators concluded that they'd all gone home after the club, which was confirmed by their cell phone logins, camera recordings, and testimonies from those they lived with. Private Detective Krzysztof Rutkowski was involved in the case from the beginning. He was able to obtain her cell phone records and hard drives before the police, as well as the security footage of her walking down the promenade. But Rutkowski's work has been highly criticized, as he's reported many different unverified versions of what happened to Ivana and accused various people of her kidnapping or murder. In August of 2010, Rutkowski claimed that he had a witness who saw the kidnapping on July 16th, and that Ivana had been forcibly dragged into a car. In 2011, he said that he had a new suspect, a 24-year-old man named Sasha, who told someone that he and two men abducted and raped a girl in Dansk. Sasha hung himself on January 3, 2011, with no mention of Ivana in the letters he left. It was later discovered that he was not in the area the night of Ivana's disappearance. He was over 200 kilometers away. Rutkowski later admitted that the information he shared about the witness was a bluff. In 2012, the police investigation was formally closed, but that didn't stop others from searching for Ivana. In 2017, a detective agency in Lampart suspected local garbage truck drivers of Ivana's murder, claiming that in a photo taken on the morning of July 17th, you can see her body in the back of a garbage truck. The drivers had already been interrogated a year after her disappearance. Two of them stated that they didn't remember anything about that morning, but the third man said that he saw Ivana talking to the man with a towel over his shoulders on a bench. The media described the police's handling of the case as clumsy. Their work was later investigated by the Supreme Audit Office, which determined they'd failed to publish information about the disappearance to media and failed to secure surveillance footage of Ivana. Ivana's mother also said that telephone records weren't checked until many months after her daughter's disappearance, despite her pressuring police to look into them. On May 19, 2021, Rutkowski and his team searched the area where Ivana was last seen and found a shirt in a plastic bag, tights, a skirt, and two knives buried. Rutkowski said a former prisoner had led him to the evidence, but according to reports, Ivana hadn't been wearing tights on the night she disappeared, and the knives Rutkowski discovered didn't look like they'd been buried for 11 years. Many people have said that Rutkowski's involvement in the case has been harmful, leading the media and police down rabbit holes and causing distractions. A journalist covering the case said the police stopped cooperating with him a long time ago because it turned out he was lying constantly. Early on in this case, investigators considered that Ivana had run away since there'd been no evidence of kidnapping or murder, although they never found evidence to support that theory. Another theory is that Ivana was a victim of a local serial killer. A week after Ivana's disappearance, a 34-year-old woman was found dead after leaving her friends at a festival. A year later, a 13-year-old girl was murdered north of Sospot. Both perpetrators are still at large. Ivana's disappearance is considered one of the most difficult puzzles Polish investigators have had to uncover. In 2019, the case was passed on to the Malopolska branch of the National Prosecutor's Office in Krakow, so it could be investigated by the Ex-Archive Department, where new technology experts and research institutions are used to examine the evidence. It still currently remains unsolved. Number 2. Stephen Cotter. On December 13, 2009, 30-year-old Stephen Cotter parked his car at the end of a cul-de-sac retirement community in Henderson, Nevada. In footage captured by nearby home security systems, you can see Stephen get out of his car and leave the area only to return a short time later to retrieve an item from his car and leave again. He has not been seen since. Stephen was originally from Amarillo, Texas, and was a devout Mormon who didn't use drugs or drink alcohol. He'd been living in Salt Lake City, Utah, before relocating to St. George, Utah in 2009. Stephen was struggling to find work amidst the Great Recession, but was actively seeking out opportunities. He'd found a job handing out flyers for a window washing company, but it wasn't enough to pay his bills. In the days leading to his disappearance, Stephen made an unscheduled visit to his ex-girlfriend, Anna Marie Neffs. Though she wasn't home, her family invited him in to stay for lunch, where he told him he was on his way to visit family in Sacramento, California. Though instead he returned to St. George, as he feared bad weather would make his trip difficult. He also spoke to his mother on the phone that day, who said he seemed upbeat as they talked about upcoming Christmas plans. The next day, on December 11th, Stephen was seen helping a couple of children who'd been locked out of their home. He also talked to his bishop, who promised Stephen he'd have a job for him in early 2010, and the bishop noticed that he seemed positive, despite the struggles he was facing. On December 12th, the day before his disappearance, Stephen's phone pinged a cell tower near Overton, Nevada, near Lake Mead. He also bought a baby's bib and snacks from the Kmart outside St. George, which were believed to be Christmas gifts for his family. His neighbor recalled seeing him around 10 p.m. that night. Half an hour later, he left his home, but wasn't seen coming back. The next morning, Greg Webb, the president of Stephen's local church ward, called him to tell him that he was in Las Vegas and may not make it in time for a church meeting. He wanted to see if Stephen could lead the meeting instead. Stephen told him that he too was in the Las Vegas area, but he could make it on time if it was necessary. Webb told him not to worry about it. Another church member also called Stephen that day and had a similar conversation. Neither man asked Stephen why he was in the Las Vegas area, but they agreed the conversations seemed normal. Just before noon, a home surveillance camera captured Stephen parking on the cul-de-sac. He got out wearing a white shirt and slacks and was carrying a blue folder or portfolio and didn't appear disoriented. He had no known connections to the Henderson area. At 5 p.m., his phone pinged a cell tower 10 miles north of where his car was parked. 2 hours later, it pinged again another 2 miles north. The next morning, it pinged again another 2 hours north between the Interstate 515 and U.S. Route 93 and Russell Road. That morning, Stephen's phone was used to check his voicemail, and it received a text from his landlord, but there was no activity after that. According to the phone tracking data, Stephen's phone remained in the general vicinity of the last tower ping for 2 days, which suggested his phone died there. The next day, local parking enforcement spotted Stephen's car and started trying to locate its owner. The officer saw a stack of flyers for the window washing company in the car, so he called the phone number that was advertised and spoke to the business owner. The business owner gave him Stephen's cell phone number, but there was no answer. The officer then called Stephen's mother, who didn't answer, but returned the call on December 17th. She then realized no one had heard from Stephen in about a week, so she called his brother and sister, who traveled up to St. George to help find him. They went to jails, morgues, and hospitals in the area to try and locate Stephen, with no success. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department also went door-to-door in the Sun City retirement community in search of witnesses or leads, and also searched the area around it with helicopters and sniffer dogs, to no avail. By Christmas, the media had picked up on the story, and in February 2010, his family put out a $10,000 reward to whoever could lead them to Stephen. They also filmed an episode of investigation discovery show Disappeared in 2011, but no new leads came from it. Stephen's family believes he went to Henderson in search of a job opportunity, not because he wanted to escape his issues in life. Police say the contents of his car, which included Christmas presents and job applications, suggested he intended to return home. They said that there was no suspicious activity in his bank records or phone records, and nothing suspicious on his computers, in his search history, or in his diary. And a theory emerged that he was traveling to traffic drugs. A drug-sniffing dog was brought to his vehicle, but nothing was identified. According to his family, his travel history wasn't unusual. as he was researching his family history in the area and would often take day trips to keep himself busy. At one point, it was suggested that Stephen's disappearance was linked to missing woman Susan Powell, who disappeared a week prior from her Salt Lake City home. Susan had been having marital problems, and her husband's family suspected that she had run off with Stephen and framed her husband for her murder. The police found no connection between the two missing people and no evidence to support this theory. Utah and Nevada's police are continuing to investigate Stephen's case, but his family has struggled with the uncertainty of his whereabouts. His brother Dalen said, "We're stuck between hope and grief because we want to hope for the best, but we can't grieve because we don't know what happened."
It's tough to move on and grieve without knowing what happened and why.
We have this open spot that just isn't in our hearts. This just it's not going to go away.
Number 3. Lashaya Stein. It was July 15th, 2016 when Lashaya Stein went missing. At the time, the 16-year-old was an honors student at George Washington High School in Aurora, Colorado. She planned on studying nursing and had a job interview coming up at a local sandwich shop. Lashaya's mother described her as a good and gentle daughter who would stay out late and go to parties like so many other teenagers, but still respected her mother. She said that Lashaya was typically easy to get a hold of aside from one instance when she couldn't get in touch with her and started to panic. She ended up finding her later that day while driving through the neighborhood. This time, though, things were different. On the night of July 15th, Lashaya snuck out of her room, which was located in the basement of their home, leaving no indication of where she was going. Her mother said that she had no idea why Lashaya would have left home or who she was going to meet. She left her wallet, money, phone charger, and clothing at home. Upon review, investigators found that the window in her room unlocked and discovered that the plant in front of it had been moved, leading them to believe this was how she snuck out undetected. The first sighting of Lashaya came from CCTV footage captured near her home at 2:30 a.m. In the footage, Lashaya is seen crossing the street close to Montview Boulevard and Peoria Street. Over the years, several other sightings of Lashaya have been reported in many different areas. Police have received multiple tips from people claiming that Lashaya had been drugged and trafficked, which they followed up upon. At one point, a pimp contacted Lashaya's family and told her mother that she was being trafficked by a man out of a hotel, which was corroborated by witnesses. But by the time police arrived at the hotel, the only thing they could find were women's clothes scattered throughout the room. Then, in late 2020, they got a lead. The FBI and Aurora police had received a tip about a home in connection to Lashaya's case. They conducted a 3-day search of the property, which was located in the 2200 block of Lansing Street in Aurora, 13 blocks from where Lashaya was last seen. She had reportedly known the family who lived there at the time of her disappearance.
Police told us then that they believe Lashaya knew the family that was living in the home. We also had the chance to hear from her mother about the search for Lashaya back in 2017.
No, God has a plan. I know that in my heart. And I always say, God, you gave her to me. I just pray you give her back.
The police found a few things in their search that required a closer look, which led to the drilling of the basement and removing concrete from the home. They stated that they'd processed any evidence to determine if it was connected to Lashaya's disappearance, but so far no leads have come from the home search. Due to consistent sightings, Lashaya is assumed to be alive and would now be 21 years old. The police and her family continue to search for her and are working to bring her home safely. Her mother delivered a message to her daughter saying,
"Baby girl, you gotta be strong, whatever the situation is, and you gotta come home. You gotta come home."
The police have yet to name a suspect in Lashaya's disappearance, but a $15,000 reward is being offered to encourage anyone with information to come forward to the Aurora police or to send an anonymous tip to Crime Stoppers. Hannah Up. September 2017 had been a vicious hurricane season for the Caribbean. The island of St. Thomas in the United States Virgin Islands was battered from Hurricane Irma when word got out that there would be a second hurricane approaching. With days to prepare, residents of the small island began to either evacuate the island or bunker down. One of the residents who chose to stay was 32-year-old Hannah Up. Hannah taught at the island's Montessori school and was described as vibrant, energetic, fearless, and adventurous, but the stress from the hurricane seemed to be taking a toll. While she was preparing her classroom for the second storm, her coworkers noticed she was off. Her positive, bubbly demeanor was muted. She was described as acting complacent and quiet, which was very unusual for her, though at the time it was easy to brush that off as just stress from the storm. On September 14th, Hannah's roommate saw her get up and leave the house around 8 a.m. Though it was earlier than she usually left the house, her roommate assumed that she was going to work early to help out the school. This would end up being the last confirmed sighting of Hannah. The following day, Hannah missed a meeting at the school, and her coworker and best friend, Maggie Guzman, thought that this was highly unusual. She tried to call her, but no answer, and had stopped by Hannah's house and noticed her car wasn't in the driveway. Becoming increasingly concerned, Maggie started contacting Hannah's friends and family. One of Hannah's oldest friends cryptically told her to look by water. Maggie started a search party and asked people to start looking in Hannah's favorite spots. One beach in particular, Sapphire Beach, was Hannah's favorite place to swim. The beach was a disaster. Hurricane Irma had turned the pristine beach into a wrecking yard of debris. The beach was deserted, but there in the parking lot was Hannah's car. Inside the vehicle were her purse, passport, ID, and hundreds of dollars in cash. On a bar stool in what used to be a beach hut bar was a pile of neatly folded clothing, sandals, and car keys, all belonging to Hannah. At that point, Hannah had already been missing for 2 days when the official search for her began. It was believed that she'd gone for a swim and something may have happened to her. Because ferries and local boaters were helping to evacuate the island, there was heavy boat traffic that day. The entire perimeter of the island was searched, with no sign of Hannah anywhere. During the search, it was discovered that this wasn't the first time that Hannah had gone missing. This would be the third time, and the previous 2 incidents also had happened under similar circumstances. Back in September 2008, the then 23-year-old Hannah said goodbye to her roommate. It had been the first day of her new teaching job in New York City. Again, she failed to show up for work, which immediately launched a missing person investigation. The NYPD had treated the case from the start as an abduction, as Hannah had disappeared without her wallet, ID, and left cash in her apartment. She vanished without a trace. 9 days into her disappearance, NYPD received a call from a man who'd gone to school with Hannah, and he said that he'd seen her at an Apple store. He said that he'd gone up to her and asked her if she was the Hannah that was missing, and bizarrely, she said that she wasn't Hannah, nor was she missing. This confused the man, as he was sure he was talking to Hannah, and she was very much missing. The NYPD got surveillance footage from the store, and they were able to confirm it was Hannah Up. Why had she told the man she wasn't Hannah?
Seems that there's a moment in time, and then she's just not there.
Police say she was positively identified in Manhattan's Midtown area shortly after 9 a.m. Tuesday morning. Local media reports she was seen checking her email at an Apple store. The New York City Police Department is still seeking the public's assistance in locating Up. Anyone with any information is asked to contact Crime Stoppers. Authorities say all information will be kept strictly confidential.
The NYPD determined that Hannah had been at the Apple store to log into her Gmail account and confirmed that she was alive, but it started more questions than answers. What was she doing? Why was she hiding? Why had she seemingly abandoned her life? 2 weeks into her disappearance, it was discovered that she had been using the facilities of her old gym to shower. Though she had no ID on her, she remembered her gym number, and a front desk person was able to confirm her identity. She'd also been sighted at a Starbucks in Soho, but she had disappeared again by the time officers had arrived. On the 20th day since she'd first gone missing, the ferry captain of Staten Island Ferry saw a woman's head bobbing in the water, floating face down. They deployed a rescue boat and assumed the young woman was dead, and were shocked when she gasped for air and started crying as they lifted her out of the water. She was taken to the hospital, severely dehydrated, hypothermic, and covered in sunburns, but otherwise okay. She wasn't able to tell medical staff who she was or what had happened to her. At the hospital, she was diagnosed with a rare form of amnesia called dissociative fugue. Usually only brought on by extreme psychological trauma, it is the same form of amnesia that was portrayed in the Jason Bourne story. Sufferers often appear very typical. Though they may not be able to tell people who they are, they can continue on everyday activities that they may have done routinely in the past, like show up at your old gym or go to places that are most familiar to them. What had happened to Hannah that brought on this state? Eventually, Hannah could remember her first name and gave medical staff her mother's phone number. Her mother arrived less than an hour later, and the first thing Hannah said was, "Why am I wet?" She had no memory of the past 3 weeks, and the last thing she remembered was going for a run the day she went missing. She was embarrassed by the news coverage and had even considered changing her name to get away from the publicity. A year after the incident in New York, she left. She eventually landed in Maryland, where she became a teaching assistant at a Montessori school for underserved children. She loved the theology behind Montessori and enjoyed her work there. She went all in, 100% into her work. It was a September morning in 2011 when Hannah's mother got a call from the police. Hannah had once again been reported missing, and like before, her purse, cell phone, and wallet had all been located, but this time on a footpath on a walking trail. When her purse had been found, the last time anyone had seen her was the day before. Another search was undertaken, and it was close to midnight when her mother received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end only said, "Mom?" Hannah had again been in a fugue state, but she had come out of it by herself, and when she came to, she realized she was sitting in a creek with a shopping cart next to her. Once again, she had no idea how she got there or how much time had passed this time. She'd been able to navigate herself out of the woods and found some commercial buildings where she was able to borrow a stranger's phone. All 3 disappearances had happened in September, right before a new school year began. In the days following up to her 2017 disappearance, friends had noticed she had been acting odd. She had told one friend that she didn't like the fall. None of her friends in St. Thomas knew about her past disappearances. Her family had been nervous for her to move so far away, but Hannah had laughed and said, "It's a small island, how far can I go?" 6 days before her disappearance, she stopped using her phone. She seemed to be on autopilot, but because those closest to her had no idea about her past, they brushed it off as stress from the storms. She could have already been transitioning into a fugue state for several days before it eventually took over. Hannah was a strong swimmer, and for some reason she was drawn to the water when she was in a fugue state. She had mentioned after her 2011 disappearance that water helped her to find herself. Back on St. Thomas, crews searched desperately for 2 days before the search had to be called off because Hurricane Maria was touching down. Even worse than Irma, Maria brought on heavy winds and rain and once again battering St. Thomas. After the hurricane passed, the search was taken up again by boat and helicopter. All 80 islands in the area were searched with no sign of Hannah. Other theories that were run down were that she may have swum to one of the other islands or had been picked up by a local boater. The days leading up to Hurricane Maria were a flurry of activity, and it could have been possible that she'd been lost in the shuffle. Her disappearance in New York demonstrated that she was very resourceful and could draw from previous knowledge to keep her safe. Her mother routinely visits St. Thomas, and everyone on the island knows what Hannah looks like. Her mother remains optimistic that one day Hannah will pop up somewhere and remember who she is.
Do you think you'll ever know for sure, Barbara, what happened?
I can only tell you that hope is persistent, and many people join me in that hope.
Elaine Park. On January 27, 2017, Elaine Park got in her car and disappeared in the early morning hours. The 20-year-old had spent the night at her on-and-off boyfriend's house in Calabasas, Los Angeles, California. Her boyfriend, Div Compere, said the two had seen a movie the night before, and when they went to bed, everything seemed normal. However, around 4 a.m., Elaine seemed to have woken up abruptly and was experiencing a panic attack. She told him she wanted to leave, and she did around 6 a.m. Div was the son of a wealthy businessman and lived with his parents in a high-end, gated community. She was seen leaving in her car by security cameras at the house, as well as a license plate scanner on her way out of the gated community. This was the last confirmed sighting of Elaine. Elaine Park had been born on September 24, 1996, and she grew up in La Crescenta, California, a small community outside of LA. The community was described as tight-knit and everyone knows everyone kind of community. Elaine was an incredibly artistic person. She had a sweet and bubbly personality that drew people to her. Elaine was on the cheerleading team in high school, and she was active in her school's theater program. She loved acting, singing, dance, poetry, and had dreams of breaking into Hollywood as an actress. She'd already had a few minor roles under her belt in ER, Desperate Housewives, and Crazy Stupid Love. Elaine was coming off of a rough year. She had recently dropped out of college, was laid off from her job, and had struggled to cope with her parents' divorce. She was living with her mom Susan in La Crescenta, and her mother had seen her the day before her disappearance. She said that Elaine had asked to borrow $20 and told her that she was going out with Div. Her mother gave her the money and Elaine left. It was about an hour's drive from La Crescenta to Calabasas, and she arrived around 7 p.m. Elaine texted her mom when she arrived and told her that she would be going to the movies. The two spent a few hours hanging out, and at 10:30 p.m., they took an Uber to the movie theater in Calabasas Commons. They returned via Uber at around 1 a.m., which was confirmed with security footage, and they went to bed shortly after. Div said that it was around 4 a.m. when Elaine started acting erratically. He said that she was shaking and singing, and he said that to him, she seemed to be having a panic attack. He said that he tried to get her to stay, but she wanted to leave, and he didn't stop her. She was picked up leaving on the security cameras, and her body language doesn't indicate any sign of stress, agitation, or fear. Later that day, her mother sent her a text message, but initially she wasn't alarmed when she didn't get a response from her daughter. She also wasn't concerned when Elaine didn't come home that night, as she had assumed she was still with Div. Elaine was in her 20s and wasn't in the habit of telling her mom where she was all the time. January 30th, she tried to call Elaine several times and throughout the day, and noticed that some of the calls went straight to voicemail, while other times it would ring once or twice before going to voicemail. It was very unlike Elaine to not respond to calls, and it was at this point that Susan contacted Glendale Police Department to file a missing person report. Elaine was also very active on social media, and her social media activity was completely halted on January 27th. It was a huge red flag for Elaine's friends and family, who now were increasingly concerned about the whereabouts of Elaine. The first time Susan called to file a report, she had been told to wait a couple days, and she had to call back again on January 31st to get a missing person report filed and start an investigation. There was now a 4-day window from the last time she had seen her daughter. The investigation began and the Uber drivers were interviewed, and neither noticed anything unusual with Elaine or Div. They said that the couple seemed happy, were having a good time, and nothing stood out. Her family said that Elaine had never suffered from panic attacks in the past, and thought it was unusual that she would suddenly have one the night she disappeared. There were questions about drug use, though Div denied that they had used any substances. Friends of Elaine said that she had been known to experiment in the past, but wasn't a frequent drug user. Police said that Div cooperated fully with officers and he wasn't considered a suspect. Police focused on using her cell phone ping to locate her, and on February 5th, her phone pinged off of a cell tower in Malibu. 9 days after her disappearance, officers located her gray 2015 Honda Civic. It was found seemingly abandoned along the Pacific Coast Highway. It was a heavily populated area with houses and businesses all along the beach. Her car was found unlocked, keys in the ignition, with the lights on and a dead battery. All of her belongings were laid out inside the car, which included her laptop, cell phone, and money. It was unclear why it was in Malibu. It wasn't an area of LA that Elaine frequented. Except for the battery, the car was fine. There was also no sign of struggle in the vehicle forensically. Bloodhounds were brought in and they didn't pick up her scent in the area, and cadaver dogs also went through the car and they didn't indicate to anything suspicious. It also didn't seem likely that her car had been there long. Residents in the area said they would have noticed a car not moving for several days with the lights on. Also, because the car had been found unlocked, with the keys in the ignition, it led officers to believe that the car had been dumped and maybe someone had intended to have the car stolen. Detectives searched the coastal area near the car for 2 weeks and found nothing else related to Elaine's disappearance. Officers didn't release how much cash was found in Elaine's car, but Elaine's mother noted it was more than the $20 she had given her. Her family says that they don't think that Elaine left willingly, and she didn't have the means to run away and start a new life. The Glendale Police Department made a huge mistake, which may have undermined the entire investigation. They returned the vehicle and all of the personal items found in the car to Elaine's family without taking fingerprints or DNA samples from any of the items, though they told media that they felt that the disappearance was suspicious and likely foul play. The Parks family hired their own private detective, but he wasn't able to locate any new information that led to finding Elaine. Police are asking anyone from Calabasas and Malibu to check their security or dash cams from January 28, 2017 to February 2, 2017. Elaine was last seen wearing a light gray sweatshirt, denim shorts, and a white athletic shoes. She also has waist-length brown hair with blonde tips. She is of Korean descent, standing at 5'5" and very petite. She has 4 distinct tattoos. On her left arm, she has a moth on her forearm and a cow skull on her upper arm. On her right arm, she has a dagger and a rose on her left shoulder. She also might be wearing a gold necklace with the letter E. It was her favorite necklace and it wasn't found with her belongings. If you have any information, please contact the number on this poster. Cleondra Hall. In early May 1994 in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, 18-year-old Cleondra Hall was dropped off at her clerical job by her mother. She was most often called Clea and worked for Dr. Larry Amos, who ran a nonprofit organization out of his house. The teen was close to graduating high school and she only had 2 weeks left, and then she had plans of becoming a pediatrician. She had a summer internship lined up in Boston and was registered to start pre-med classes in the fall at Tennessee State University. Clea worked evenings and weekends and typically called one of her parents to pick her up when she was finished. Clea called at 8 p.m. and her mother answered. Clea asked if anyone had called the house for her, and no one had, so Clea said she was almost finished and she would call again for her ride. Her mother hung up and waited for that call, but ended up dozing off on the couch. The phone never rang again, and her mother, Laurel, woke up with a start at 12:45 a.m. when her husband came home from work. Laurel immediately called Dr. Amos, and she said that he answered on the first ring. He noted that Clea had left at 8:30 p.m. and got into a vehicle he didn't recognize. At first, her mother assumed that she might have called up a friend and went somewhere with them. She stayed up all night waiting, but Clea never walked through the door. Her family had hoped that she would be at school the following day, but deep down her mother knew that something wasn't right. Clea never took off. She was an incredibly responsible teenager. She was an honor student, top of her class, and was given the commencement speech at her graduation ceremony in 2 weeks. She worked hard to save for college and was active in her church and multiple academic clubs. She never went anywhere without telling anyone. Clea also didn't have her purse or any ID. None of her belongings were missing. There was no way she had planned on leaving for an extended amount of time. Clea's brother called home from school the following morning and let his parents know that she wasn't there, and they called the police to report her missing. Unfortunately, like so many of these cases, police told Clea's mother to wait 24 hours and hold tight in case she came back. When the allotted 24 hours passed, an official police report was filed, but it contained very little information, and a search was not started immediately. Clea's parents organized their own search party with community members, and after a few days, law enforcement got involved. Clea's parents were upset that the Pine Bluff Police Department didn't take Clea's disappearance seriously right from the beginning. No evidence was found in the search. It was as if she had just vanished. A person of interest was her employer, Dr. Larry Amos. He had been the last to see her alive, and he had left the state the following morning after her disappearance. He also wasn't cooperative with the police, and he wouldn't allow officers to search the home for evidence. When asked to take a polygraph test, he also refused. However, Clea had worked for Dr. Amos for over a year and had never expressed any concerns over her safety, felt he was aggressive or off, and she enjoyed her job and there had never been any complaints. Clea had a boy that she'd been interested in dating. and he was also considered a person of interest. He fully cooperated with police and had his vehicle searched, which yielded no evidence of Clea. He also took a polygraph test and was cleared as a suspect. 18 years later, in 2012, 2 construction workers came forward with new statements. One said that he'd been hired to work on the home of Dr. Amos in the late 90s. While he'd been working, he noticed some of the insulation was stained with what looked to him to be blood. The other worker had been hired to do some landscaping, and he said that when the wind blew a particular direction, he would smell a horrible odor, unlike anything he had ever smelled before. It is unclear why the men had waited so long to come forward to the police, but it was enough to get a court order to access the house for the first time. Police brought in cadaver dogs, took drywall and insulation samples, and searched the property. The search sparked a hope that there would be answers or justice for Clea. However, something happened during the police search. 4 bags of evidence were removed from the home, and an officer was charged with maintaining chain of custody. He had been expected to bring the evidence straight to the forensic lab. However, for some reason, he went home with the evidence and decided to leave it in his trunk overnight. This led to all 4 bags of evidence being dismissed as the chain of custody had been broken, and the integrity of the evidence had been compromised. The officers involved were reprimanded, and it was a crushing blow to the investigation. They couldn't go back, and without any new evidence, the case went cold. Police now believe that Clea was a victim of foul play, and tragically, her mother agrees. Laura Hall said that she is certain Clea was murdered. Clea has been missing for 27 years with no new leads since 2012.
If I stop looking, or we stop looking, or we stop letting go of our balloons, who's going to help me find out what happened to my child?
A child with big dreams, whose mysterious disappearance haunts an Arkansas community.
Nicolevino. On March 31, 2007, 32-year-old Jacqueline Nicolevino, who is most commonly known as Nicole, left her hotel in Hama, Syria to do some sightseeing. Nicole was on her final month of a 6-month solo backpacking trip. Her travels on this particular trip had taken her from West Africa and throughout the Middle East. Syria had meant to be a quick stop on her way to Turkey. That morning, she had asked a hotel desk clerk for directions to a sightseeing destination called the Beehive Houses, as well as a nearby castle. She was given the directions, and then she left for the morning. After she left the hotel, she wasn't seen again. It didn't seem as though Nicole made it to her destination, as she didn't check into the guest logbooks. Locals also didn't remember seeing her, and as a Western woman in an area that wasn't a vastly popular tourist destination who also wore her hair uncovered, she would have stood out. Her mother first became concerned when Nicole failed to answer her email from Easter. It was very unlike her to go several weeks without any communication. On April 19th, her family contacted the Canadian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it was then that they discovered that Nicole had never made it to Turkey. When they found the hotel she had last stayed in, the hotel casually informed them that Nicole's belongings were still in the hotel. There had been no evidence to suggest that Nicole had intended to go on an outing longer than the day trip she had planned. Her belongings that were recovered from the hotel included her journals, clothing, and memory cards for her camera. According to Nicole's brother, in 2007, Syria was considered very safe for women to travel in, especially Canadians. He and other tourists described locals as being very kind and respectful to travelers. This was before the wars and civil unrest that Syria is experiencing today. Nicole was also an experienced traveler. She loved history and architecture. She had been traveling alone to remote regions of the world for over 10 years. In August 2007, the family was given hope of recovering Nicole when they received an email from 2 Syrian men demanding ransom money in exchange for releasing Nicole. The men were arrested in Spain, and it was discovered that they had been trying to exploit the family for money and weren't involved in Nicole's disappearance. Only a month prior, Nicole's family had all been in Syria distributing flyers with Nicole's information on it, which had also included the reward money. The men had likely gotten the specifics from that flyer, and they were later charged with extortion and jailed.
Kathryn Murray, you're coming from Canada, and you're the mother of Nicolevino, who's been missing for over 1 year, Yes. I'm afraid I'll sound a little bit naive, maybe if I ask you why you are here after 1 year of her missing.
Nicole went missing in Hama, and that's the last place we saw her, and until we find her, we'll keep coming back to look for her. So
Still hopeful.
We're still hopeful until we have proof to the contrary. We need to find Nicole, and we need to bring her home.
What did you do for all this time?
In the past year or during?
Yes.
We've been to Syria several times. My son has been here. Her fiance Gary has been here a couple of times. We were here last year. We have been checking out any lead that has come. We haven't reward offered, and any lead that has come, we've had the police investigating it. We have been, how would you put it, working through talking to anyone else who might have seen her, all the other guests at the hotel where she was staying in Hama, and we have through the internet been able to get in contact with most of them. They've helped in placing her there. One of the American guests saw her on the Friday night, so we know she was at the hotel on the Friday night. We've had Microsoft with Hotmail help us with her internet and say that she had used her email later on the Friday night. So we are trying to place her comings and goings so that we just know where she was last seen.
Mm-hmm. Gary, you're her fiancé, and now this is the second time maybe in Syria.
This is my third trip here, actually, my third trip. Yeah. And we've, like Kathryn says, we'll keep coming to Syria until we find her, till we find resolution. We work very closely with the Canadian Embassy here in Damascus, with Syrian government, Syrian police, and the local community to try to piece together the events leading up to her disappearance to try to figure out what might have happened with her.
What kind of efforts did the Syrian authorities exert?
Well, they've placed it, very high priority. Every level of government, local police as well as the national police have assisted us in trying to follow up leads. The embassy has supplied us with some leads. People had called the embassy with bits of information, and the Syrian police have followed them up, trying to find somebody that has seen her. So far, we haven't had very many, fruitful outcomes, but all the people in Syria seem to want to find her. It is definitely the intention of the government and Syrian police to find her, for sure.
You yourself have had your own way of tracing her, or any clue about her? What did you do?
Well, I spent a lot of time in Hama. I've canvassed the neighborhoods where she stayed, and I've canvassed all the sites that she may have gone to see, Khazar bin Wardan, up near El Hamra, Sarouj, places like that. I've talked to local officials in all those small communities. I've handed out thousands of leaflets and pamphlets, posters to the community, trying to find information, trying to keep the story of her, alive in the country, so that if somebody knows something, one day they might come forward and tell us about it, and to help us.
Nicole is interested maybe in the archaeological sites. Maybe she will visit some places. And maybe my friend Daniel told me that not necessarily she would be in the neighborhood of Hama, maybe moved to Ebla in Idlib or any other place, So the focus always on Hama, is it?
Primarily on Hama and the surrounding area, but it's true. Nicole, she likes history and art. She's interested in archaeological sites and that. And she would travel around to see those things. But her last known whereabouts was Hama, and based on the stuff that she took with her on the trip and what she left in her hotel room, she would only have gone for the day. So it would be in the vicinity of Hama, not too far away, where she would have intended to go to that day. Nicole likes to travel, she likes people and to see things, and she's certainly, she's a caring, honest person, and she would just be out to take photographs and to experience Syria, meet the people, and something horrible has happened and she has not returned, and we just don't know what it is.
Okay.
Nicole was last seen wearing a white long-sleeve shirt with a red t-shirt layered on top, khaki pants, gray and black New Balance sneakers, and a blue backpack. Her family is still offering a $45,000 reward for any information leading to Nicole. Charles and Kathryn Romer. Charles and Kathryn Romer were returning from their vacation home in Miami, Florida on April 8, 1980. They had decided to rest for the night in Brunswick, Georgia. Charles, who was 73, and his wife Kathryn, 75, checked into a motel, dropped off their bags, and went for dinner. Charles was a retired oil executive, and he and Kathryn made the trip from Scarsdale, New York to Miami every year. They were last seen in their black 1978 Lincoln Continental. A patrol officer remembered seeing the vehicle in a car park near a cluster of restaurants. The couple had planned on being back in New York by April 10th. The hotel called police on April 11th when they went in to clean the room and noted it was virtually untouched, other than the belongings left behind. A massive search was undertaken, but no trace of the couple or their vehicle were ever found. The couple's sons had hired a private investigator, and two theories came from their collective search. Either the couple were victims of a robbery and foul play, or they ran off the road and into the swamp. 5 years after they disappeared, Charles was declared dead and his $1.2 million estate was left to their sons, Richard and Charles Jr. Their sons continue to fund searches for their parents, hopeful that one day they can have answers. Lisane Froen and Chris Cremers. This story was requested by a loyal subscriber, Rejected Driftwood. Thank you for the suggestion. And if you'd like to suggest a particular case, just a reminder that in the comment section isn't the best place, as it does get a little lost. You can always email me, which is in my description box, and send it over there, and I will do my best to try and include them in these videos. This story was quite a challenge, as there aren't a lot of reliable sources that were reported in English in this case. It is mostly theories, conspiracies, and opinions, which is not the type of research I normally include in my videos. I did my best to try and use the most consistent sources to report on this as accurately as possible. In March 2014, two Dutch women went missing while hiking in Panama. Lisane Froen and Chris Cremers were friends and roommates from the Netherlands. Lisane was 22 and Chris was 21. They both grew up in Amersfoort, and while they had different passions academically, they shared a love of travel and adventure. The girls had moved in together, sharing a dorm, and they both worked at the same cafe. They were saving up for 6 months for a trip to Panama that they planned together. The trip was to be a graduation celebration, as Froen had recently graduated with a degree in applied sciences in September of the year prior. They had planned to combine the vacation with humanitarian efforts while also practicing their Spanish. They had arrived in Panama on the 15th of March. It was planned to be a 6-week vacation. 4 of those weeks were to be spent living with the host family while they worked as volunteers in the city of Boquete. On the 29th of March, they arrived at the home of their host family, but they were told their jobs were to start in a week. They decided to take advantage of the time that they had to explore the area that they were in. Boquete is a small mountain village in Panama. It is full of beautiful, lush mountainscapes, making it a popular destination for both locals and tourists. Its main economy is agriculture, and Boquete is the producer of some of the world's finest coffee beans. It is also a popular destination for North Americans to retire. 14% of its inhabitants are foreigners. It is a more comfortable climate than the rest of the country, has excellent drinking water, clean air, and offers a quiet and peaceful environment with a low cost of living. On April 1st, the girls went out for a hike. They took with them a dog from the village and set out. They had posted on Facebook about going to explore the area, as well as meeting up with some fellow Dutch travelers for brunch that morning. Once they set out on their hike, they stopped posting on social media. The owners of the dog were alarmed when later that evening the dog returned, but there was no sign of the two women. But it wasn't until April 3rd that the authorities began a search. Local residents also helped search for the girls, but there was no sign of them. By the 6th of April, the parents of Froen and Cremers arrived in Panama, along with specialized professionals, search dogs, and detectives from the Netherlands. They searched for 10 days, and the parents were also offering a $30,000 reward, but with no evidence to be found, the case quickly went cold. 10 weeks passed before they got their first piece of evidence. A local recovered a backpack, and it was determined to have belonged to Lisane. It was dry, in good condition, and the woman who found it hadn't been sure when the bag had appeared, but she was certain it hadn't been there long. The backpack contained 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in American, Lisane's passport, a water bottle, a camera, 2 bras, and 2 cell phones. One cell phone was Lisane's, and the other was Chris's. The bras also matched photographs from what the girls were wearing that day. The bag wasn't anything fancy, it wasn't even waterproof. It wouldn't have stayed dry in a jungle for 10 days unprotected. The belongings were also neatly packed inside, and everything was in excellent condition. Authorities were able to unlock both cell phones, and along with photos from the camera, they attempted to piece together a timeline. The photos begin with the girls having a good time on their hike. It appears that they got to the Pianista summit around 1 to 2 p.m. It was discovered that they had researched this trail. Most tourists turned around at the lookout point, but onwards there's a small waterfall. However, the trail to it is much more treacherous hike, and it isn't recommended to take without a guide. It wouldn't have been suitable for anyone not prepared or experienced in hiking in the wilderness. Photos show that the women had carried on instead of turning around at the lookout point. Had they turned around at the summit, they would have been back in Boquete by 3 or 4 p.m., giving them plenty of time before sundown. Sundown occurred at 7 p.m., meaning they would have had to turn around at the latest by 3. Lisane was known to have asthma and had complained to her host family of coughing and shortness of breath. Her asthma, paired with the change of altitude, not having a cell phone signal, and hiking a more advanced hiking trail put the women at a higher risk. Lisane's asthma inhaler was not among the belongings recovered. Investigators determined that the belongings had 34 different sets of fingerprints, with 13 sets on the bag. The cell phones revealed something had happened to the girls around 4:30 p.m. because they had made their first attempt to call the emergency line. They first tried the International and then the Panama. However, there was no reception and they weren't able to connect. On April 1st, both phones attempted to contact the emergency line. April 2nd, they tried 4 times. Each day, they had more and more attempts to find a signal connection. And then something seemed to happen between the 5th and the 7th. It appeared that Lisane's Samsung's battery had run out, and Chris's iPhone was the only phone to have battery power, and someone had attempted to access the phone 77 times while putting in the wrong code. The camera also had a weird series of photos taken in the dark. In my opinion, it seems as though they were trying to conserve their phone batteries, and it might have been that they were using the flash from the camera either as a light or perhaps a signal device. With the discovery of the backpack, they decided to search again. A few kilometers away from where the backpack was found, Chris's jean shorts were discovered. Several months after that, in the same area the backpack was found, a pelvic bone and a boot containing a foot were discovered. 33 more bone fragments were found after that, and using DNA testing, they were determined to belong to Chris and Lisane. The Panama authorities have determined that Chris Cremers and Lisane Froen got lost in the jungle, either one or both sustained an injury while trapped in the wilderness and passed of their injuries. This case is full of mysteries, and several things don't line up, like who had the bag for 10 weeks. The bag clearly hadn't spent 72 days outside in the jungle. The area that the bone fragments had been found had been searched several times prior. Why hadn't they been discovered earlier? Also, Panama officials didn't do any investigation on the DNA or the fingerprints found on the bag. We may never know the answers, and according to Panama, their case is closed, but Dutch authorities have maintained they feel the deaths are suspicious. Following their disappearance, the Panama authorities have made a greater effort to keep tourists safe, with signage, warning signs, maps, and designated with a guide only markers on trails. It is important when outdoors to always pack for the conditions, especially if you're going to be traveling on less populated trails. While cruises are often seen as a fun, relaxing vacation, there can also be a dark side to sailing on a ship in the middle of a dark ocean. According to a study from 2017, over 300 people have gone missing from cruise ships since 2000. Many missing person cases are completely cold due to the lack of security, underreporting, and delays in investigations, with little evidence, leaving devastated families wondering what happened to their loved ones. Marion Carver. In August 2004, 40-year-old Marion Carver booked a 7-day Alaskan cruise. The Boston native flew from Massachusetts to Seattle, Washington, and on August 27th, she boarded the ship. Marion was alone that summer. She was divorced, and her teenage daughter was with her ex-husband in the UK. She was also unemployed at the time, living off of a trust fund and investments. Her father described her as a very serious and independent person, and she'd been very successful in her career, allowing herself more freedoms later in life. Marion had previously been an investment banker and had done very well for herself. She was known to take solo trips without telling anyone, but this trip was different. Marion should have returned on September 2nd, but when her family couldn't reach her, they became concerned and filed a missing person report, where Marion lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts on September 7th. Police started their investigation and discovered through her credit card statements that the cruise ship tickets had been purchased along with round-trip tickets from Seattle back to Cambridge. At this point, it was several weeks after Marion had been set to return home, and police discovered that Marion hadn't arrived for her return flight. They reached out to the cruise line for more information. The cruise line was able to confirm that Marion had boarded the ship, but they couldn't confirm whether she had disembarked the boat. The cruise line had made no effort to report Marion missing.
Officials confirmed that Marion got on the cruise. They just weren't sure if she had gotten off.
Seemed like kind of a rather basic thing. If you put 2,000 people on a ship, you ought to know if 2,000 people got off the ship. They didn't know that. They couldn't tell us that.
Official channels were being stonewalled by the cruise lines, forcing Marion's father, Ken Carver, to hire a private investigator to try and get some additional information. Through that investigation, they were able to get little information. They did discover that Marion had ordered room service on the second night of the voyage, but after that there had been no activity on Marion's Sea Pass, which was an on-board payment system used to buy food and drinks, as well as get on and off the ship. They also learned from the steward of her room that her bed hadn't been slept in after the first night, but all of her belongings were still in the room, including her purse and wallet. On the third morning of the voyage, the steward reported to their superiors that Marion's room was going unused, but he had been told to do your job and forget it. Despite being told to forget about it, he continued to report that the room was being unused every day for the remainder of the trip. On the final day, the same steward asked what to do about the room, as it still contained all of Marion's belongings. His manager told him to pick up the room and put the things in storage, which he did. It wasn't until Ken had reached out to the cruise line directly that they filed a missing person report and started an internal investigation, 26 days after Marion had disappeared. When they tried to track down Marion's belongings, they couldn't be located, with the cruise ship saying that the items had been donated, though other sources said that it was a common occurrence for staff members to go through left-behind items, and this is what likely happened to her belongings. Regardless, none of her things were recovered. The cruise line stated that they had no surveillance of Marion while on the ship. According to Ken, officials from the cruise line had told him that their surveillance system operated on a 2-week cycle and the footage had been automatically deleted. However, when his lawyers subpoenaed the corporate offices, they discovered that they were actually on a 30-day system, and by the time they had been made aware of Marion's disappearance, they would have had access to that footage still, but failed to save anything from that sailing. After the subpoena, the cruise line produced a grainy photo of Marion as she had boarded, but after that they said they had nothing. There was very little accountability from the cruise line, which infuriated Ken Carver. He was horrified that he needed to go through court orders in order to obtain any information from Royal Caribbean. Ken went through years of legal battles to get information about his daughter's disappearance, a process he said that no family should have to go through. He sued the cruise line in 2005, after which Royal Caribbean issued a statement saying that they believed Marion had committed suicide. Her family does not believe this is the case, and says that they were robbed of getting answers when the cruise line was negligent in reporting her disappearance. They won their suit. Ken Carver went on to establish the International Cruise Victim Association, and in 5 years he was able to successfully lobby Congress to pass legislation for all cruise ships to immediately report onboard crimes to authorities and be required to preserve evidence. The legislation also required all ships to make several changes to improve safety, such as have rape kits and physicians on board, install peepholes on cabin doors, as well as install more security cameras. In 2013, remains were discovered on Mary Island in British Columbia, and were thought to belong to Marion, but they weren't a match. In 2020, her father passed at 83 years old after spending nearly 2 decades advocating for passenger safety on cruise ships. Fariba Amani. In February 2012, 47-year-old Fariba Amani boarded the Bahama Celebration in Florida with her boyfriend, Ramiz Golshani. Fariba was from Port Moody in British Columbia, Canada, and her boyfriend was from Coquitlam, BC. Fariba texted her sister goodbye that morning and was never heard from again. Her boyfriend Ramiz reported her missing on the 29th after saying he searched the ship for her. He said that they had watched a comedy show that evening and that he had planned to hit the casino. He said that he left Fariba at the cruise line gift shop where she was picking out souvenirs at 1 a.m. He said that he spent an unknown amount of time at the casino and wasn't sure what time he returned to the cabin. He said that he did notice Fariba wasn't in yet but wasn't concerned and went to bed. He said he woke at 7 a.m. and saw that he was still alone, and then searched for an hour before alerting staff to his missing girlfriend. A search of the vessel concluded that Fariba wasn't there, and the FBI was alerted. The FBI searched the ship 36 hours after Fariba was reported missing, as well as the waters on the ship's route, but nothing turned up in the investigation. Fariba's family were quick to let law enforcement know what they knew about Ramiz. The couple had dated for 8 months, and it wasn't an easy relationship. Fariba had told her sister that she thought Ramiz was cheating on her, and had considered hiring a private investigator. Family members noticed that Ramiz was very domineering and controlling of Fariba, and she had also mentioned that she was scared of him and wanted to leave the relationship. Fariba's family had also never met Ramiz and said that Fariba hadn't wanted to go on the trip due to her wanting to end the relationship with Ramiz, but had said that they had bought and paid for the vacation months earlier and she wanted to make the most of it. Fariba is a mother of 2 adult children. She is reported to not drink alcohol and had no reason to abandon her life. Initially, the FBI concluded that they didn't believe foul play was involved in Fariba's disappearance, but her family disagrees with that finding. Ramiz was cleared of all wrongdoings by the FBI and was allowed to return to Canada. Fariba's family filed a missing persons report, but the RCMP has stated that there isn't enough evidence to investigate Ramiz in the disappearance. Fariba's sister continues to advocate for her and hopes that one day there are answers. Amy Lynn Bradley. It was March 21, 1998, when Amy Lynn Bradley boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas for a week-long cruise. The 23-year-old was with her parents and her brother Brad, and the cruise had been a bonus from her father's work. Her parents were thrilled to tell their kids about the 7-day, all-expense-paid cruise of the Caribbean, but Amy wasn't so sure about the trip. Amy was terrified of the ocean and boats. Though a good swimmer and a lifeguard coach, it was the deep sea and the unknown waters that made her nervous. Amy was sold on the trip by her family and looked forward to spending time with them and take a break from school. Amy was close with her family and had a close bond with her younger brother. Amy had even chosen to go to college close to home to be near her family. She was pursuing a master's degree in sports psychology. The family flew from Chesterfield County, Virginia, to Puerto Rico and boarded the ship there. The first 2 nights of the trip, everything was normal. They were all having a blast exploring the amenities of the ship and enjoying their holiday. On March 23rd, the ship had a day stop in Oranjestad, Aruba, and the family explored the area together. They returned that evening for dinner and then headed to one of the clubs on the ship. Videos from that evening show it wasn't very crowded and was a pretty tame affair. Brad said that they were dancing and having a few drinks. They were with their parents after all. At 1 a.m. the ship departs Aruba, en route to Curacao, and shortly after, the Bradley parents retired for the evening, leaving their adult children to enjoy their night without their parents. Amy and Brad went to one of the 24-hour nightclubs on board to see a show put on by the house band, the Blue Orchid. They danced for a few more hours but went back to their room around 4 a.m., where they sat on their balcony chatting about the day until around 5 a.m. Brad remembered Amy mentioning she wanted to deboard in Curacao to purchase more cigarettes. Brad called it a night and left Amy, who said that she wasn't feeling very well and she wanted to sit outside for some fresh air. Brad told her goodnight and went to bed. At 5:30 a.m., Amy's father wakes up and sees Amy on the balcony still. He notes both of his children are safe in the room and goes back to sleep. They had plans to get up early that morning, have breakfast together, and then explore Curacao all day. He woke up 20 minutes later and notices the plastic chairs on the balcony were empty. Not alarmed initially, he got up and started to get ready. He assumed Amy had gone to get coffee, and he thought he would find her where they normally had breakfast. He looked around for Amy on deck, but couldn't find her. He searched the ship for an hour, and there was still no sign of his daughter. He went back to the room and woke his wife and Brad, who joined him in helping search the ship. After looking at all the usual places they expected to find Amy, they reached out to the cruise staff. They begged the captain not to allow passengers to deboard until a complete search had been undertaken. The captain of the ship said that he would ask the crew staff to do an investigation, but he would not make an announcement or contain the ship as he didn't want to alarm other passengers. The Bradleys frantically searched the ship, hoping to find anything that would help locate Amy. None of her belongings seemed to be missing, and wherever Amy had gone, she seemed to be barefoot as her shoes were still on the balcony. Her family said that Amy never went anywhere without giving them a heads up, but her brother remembered that Amy was running out of smokes and may have left the room to find more. The captain came back saying that the entire ship had been searched, but there was no sign of Amy. He He suggested she may have fallen over the rails and suggested a search of the waters. Amy's family thought that was highly unlikely because due to her fears of the ocean, she never went anywhere near the edge of the ship. At the time of her disappearance, the ship was also in shallow waters near Curacao. Someone would likely have seen her fall, or she could have easily swum back to land had she fallen. Her parents said that Amy had been approached by several waitstaff members throughout the voyage, each asking her out, and each she politely declined, and that the night that she went missing she had been seen dancing with the man that played in the house band. According to her family, suicide was also off the table in their eyes. Amy had just gotten an English bulldog puppy that had been a lifelong dream. She was also set to start a new job after the cruise, and there were no signs that Amy was experiencing any depression or mental health issues. Members of the cruise line suggested that Amy had likely disembarked the ship that morning and could likely be in Curacao, and insisted that the family look for her there. They said that they would not hold the ship for one missing passenger and insisted they leave the ship to continue to search for her on land rather than stay on the boat. The family reluctantly disembarked, and they needed time to get in contact with the American authorities to get their help. Clearly, finding Amy wasn't in the best interest of the cruise line, and they were shocked and upset by their lack of concern. They watched as the ship departed the port, leaving them in a foreign country with no support and missing their daughter. The FBI took over the investigation and asked the family to get back on the ship. They also said that they would send agents to help search, but it had already uncovered that the investigation of the ship undertaken by the cruise employees had not been thorough, and there was a good chance Amy could still be on the ship. They flew to St. Thomas to reboard the ship on the next planned stop, along with a team of FBI agents, but it was near the end of the cruise. On March 26, 48 hours after Amy was last seen, the FBI starts their investigation on board. They also went around to other passengers with photos of Amy to see if anyone saw her that morning. The investigation starts to lead to clues. Several witnesses placed Amy with the band player that she had been seen dancing with at the nightclub the night she had went missing. Someone said that they saw her get into an elevator with him at 5:45 a.m., which, if accurate, would mean she left the room about 5 minutes before her dad had started to look for her. The man's name was Alistair Douglas, but was known as Yellow. The witnesses said that they had lined up to deboard the ship, and they saw Amy with Yellow. They said that they saw him hand Amy a dark-colored drink that could have been coffee or Coke. Then they disappeared from view, but Yellow came back 10 minutes later, alone. This is the last unconfirmed sighting of Amy on the ship. There were several sightings of her over the years that leads the family to believe Amy was kidnapped and held captive in the Caribbean. The family was sent a photo years later of a woman in a brothel catalog, and experts believe that photo is of Amy. 2 Canadian tourists reported that they saw a woman matching Amy's description on a beach in Curacao that August, specifically remembering one of her tattoos. Amy has several tattoos, including the Tasmanian devil dribbling a basketball on her left shoulder, a Japanese sun, a symbol on her right ankle, and a blue gecko lizard around her navel. She also has multiple ear piercings, and her belly button is pierced, and she has a scar on her right shin. A member of the U.S. Navy also reported seeing Amy in a brothel in 1999. He said that he was approached by a young woman who said her name was Amy and she was being held against her will, but he didn't report the sighting until years later, fearing he would be disciplined for being in a brothel while on duty. The last sighting was in 2005, when a woman said that she saw a young woman flanked by men in Barbados. She said that the woman was distraught and was being threatened. She said that she followed the young woman into the washroom, and there she said that her name was Amy and she was from Virginia and needed help. But before she could get more information, the men came in and dragged her out of the bathroom. This is a sketch of the men she saw that day. The Bradley family has a $250,000 reward for information leading to Amy's return. Additionally, the FBI has $25,000 for any information about Amy. Any sightings can be valuable in locating or solving what happened to Amy Bradley. Experts want to remind people to stay alert even while on vacation and not to take your personal safety for granted. Always let your loved ones know of your travel plans, and remember, it is always recommended to travel with someone else. Letting them know where you're going to be going and when you plan on returning. While on cruise ships specifically, if you're drinking, remember to have a sober friend, and don't take drinks from strangers, and be mindful of your surroundings. Brad Doe. On October 18, 1983, a middle-aged couple were out gathering mushrooms in Lake Village, Indiana, when they came across an abandoned farm. There, they discovered shallow graves that contained the bodies of 4 deceased young men who had been drugged and stabbed. 2 of the men were quickly identified as Michael Bauer and John Bartlett, but the identities of the other 2 men remained a mystery. They soon became known as Brad Doe and Adam Doe, or the Newton County John Does. Adam Doe was a young black man between 15 and 18 years old. He had died sometime between 1982 and 1983 and still has yet to be identified. Brad Doe was described as a Caucasian male between 17 and 23 years old who died between the years of 1981 and 1983. While it would take years for Brad Doe to be identified, it didn't take as long to identify his murderer as serial killer Larry Eyler. Also known as the Highway Killer or the Interstate Killer, Eyler was already in police custody as a suspect in a series of murders when Brad Doe's body was discovered. Eyler died in prison in 1994 from AIDS-related complications while on death row for the murder of 15-year-old Danny Bridges. In a posthumous confession, it was revealed that Eyler murdered at least 21 young men. Years passed without any successful leads on Brad Doe's identity. Then, in 2019, the Newton County Coroner's Office and Rebecca Goddard, the Newton County Chief Deputy Prosecutor, reached out to the nonprofit DNA Doe Project for assistance. They worked with the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification to obtain a DNA extraction from the unidentified remains. They then ran a family reference samples comparison on the DNA, which compares the DNA against DNA samples provided by the family members of missing people. In January of 2021, Brad Doe's DNA sample was sent off to Hudson Alpha Discovery for more genome sequencing, and in March of 2021, Sabre Investigations began their bioinformatics work. They developed a DNA profile to upload to GEDmatch, a website used for genetic genealogy research, and found a potential match. To confirm the match, investigators connected with Brad Doe's possible relatives, who voluntarily submitted their DNA samples to the database. It was a 99.59% match. After over 37 years, the Newton County Coroner's Office was finally able to identify Brad Doe by his true name, John Ingram Brandenburg, Jr. John, often called Johnny by his mother, went missing from Chicago, Illinois in 1983 and was 19 years old at the time of his death. The last time his family saw him, he was leaving their home to visit a friend. Rebecca Goddard, the Newton County Chief Deputy Prosecutor involved in the case, said, "While my heart breaks for this family, I'm thankful that they finally have some of the answers they've waited so long for, and I hope this brings them peace." Christy Crystal Creek Doe. In early September 1985, a bear hunter in Missoula County, Montana, came across the skeletal remains of a woman. When police arrived on the scene, they couldn't find any clothing or personal items in the area that could help identify her, but they determined that she had died from 2 gunshot wounds and had been deceased for about a year. The unidentified woman was then referred to as the Christy Crystal Creek due to the crime scene's close proximity to Crystal Creek. Throughout the years, the case was investigated by the Missoula County Sheriff's Office and armchair detectives alike, drawing attention due to its possible connection to serial killer Wayne Nance, who operated in the area during that time. The police spent years working with a forensic anthropologist and a forensic odontologist to solve the case. They also searched through missing person databases in the US and Canada, but they could never identify her. Then, in early 2001, the Missoula County Sheriff's Office received financial assistance from the Montana Department of Justice's Sexual Assault Kit Initiative. They then joined together with Ortham Labs to conduct a forensic genealogy investigation into the remains, which determined that they belonged to someone from the Lucas family tree in Spokane, Washington. After several interviews, they confirmed their identification by DNA testing several of the Lucas family members. Finally, they were able to positively identify Christy Crystal Creek Doe as 23-year-old Jeanette Lee Lucas. Jeanette was a mother from Spokane, Washington. She had been missing for years and was last seen in Idaho in the summer of 1983. Her son, who was 5 years old at the time of his mother's disappearance, had dedicated much of his adult life to finding her. In a news release in May 2021, Detective Captain Dave Conway with the Missoula County Sheriff's Office said, "We cannot rest on our success of having finally identified Jeanette. We must now seek justice for Jeanette. Our focus has changed from who is Christy Crystal Creek to what happened to Jeanette Lucas." Detective Marta Timmons says Jeanette could have been a victim of serial killer Wayne Nance, as she was found in an area he often hung out in. Nance was known as the Missoula Mauler during the 1970s and 80s. He is believed to have killed 6 people, though he was never convicted of his crimes, as he was killed in 1986 after attacking a couple in their home. He was shot during the attack and died in the hospital on September 4th, 1986. Jeanette's remains were found near other Jane Does, Debbie Deer Creek, who was later identified as 16-year-old Marcella Sherry Bachman, and Betty Beavertail, later identified as 15-year-old Devona Nelson. Both were victims of Nance. Police are currently investigating Jeanette's death. While she was found in Montana, she did not live there, and there were no records of her visiting there. They have shared a picture of Jeanette with the public in hopes that someone may have seen or known her in the summer of 1983 to 1984. They are investigating all new information as well as evidence and reports from Nance's case files to confirm if there's a link to Jeanette's murder. Jeanette's family released a statement of her case saying not only was she a mother, but she was also a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a friend, and now a grandmother to 4 beautiful children. We are grateful to finally be able to bring her home to us, as well as bring Jeanette the peace and rest she so deserves. The Kern County Jane Doe. The Kern County Jane Doe was found on July 15, 1980, in a Kern County almond orchard just north of Bakersfield, California. Police determined that she had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death the day prior. In a description of the victim, police said that she was either Hispanic or Native American, with shoulder-length brown hair, brown eyes, and colored tattoos, which were uncommon for women at the time. The Kern County Sheriff's Office suspected that their Jane Doe might have been picked up at a nearby bar in Lemoore called Ruby's, which was 75 miles from where she was found. Police began investigating the Jane Doe case immediately, collecting her fingerprints and looking into who she could be. But since they couldn't find any information on her and never received an inquiry connected to her, her case went cold for decades.
She was the victim of a homicide. She really looked like somebody someone would miss.
Regardless of whether or not you know the identity of the victims, they were still victims.
Everybody deserves to have their name returned to them. It was like boom, boom, boom. It was like a domino, I think.
Then, in 2013, DNA from underneath Kern County Jane's fingernails were matched to serial killer Wilson Shawist, who is already serving a life sentence in prison for robbery, kidnapping, and rape. Shawist was also matched to a Ventura County Jane Doe who was found in a high school parking lot in Thousand Oaks, California, within a few days of the Kern County Jane Doe. In 2018, Shawist was convicted of the 2 murders and sentenced to life in prison. Senior Deputy District Attorney John Barrick said, "It never really mattered to me that we didn't know their identity. What we could prove absolutely is that they were people, and I think this is just another example of why, regardless of whether or not you know the identity of the victims, they were still victims. Victims of a horrible crime, and they died in a horrible way, all alone, and no one knew, and those investigators never gave up." Ventura County then reached out to the Kern County and suggested looking for a genealogy match for their Jane Doe. The Kern County Sheriff's Coroner Division Chief, Don Ratliff, contacted the DNA Doe Project for assistance with the case, requesting genetic genealogy research to identify the woman. Genealogy work officially began in May of 2019, and although the Kern County Jane Doe's DNA had broken down over the years, they were able to find usable DNA data and upload the DNA profile to GEDmatch. Through their research, they determined that Jane Doe was a descendant of the Indigenous First Nations people of Canada, likely from the Cree Nation in Alberta, Manitoba, or Saskatchewan. Unfortunately, First Nations people are very underrepresented in most DNA databases, making it even more difficult for missing people within their community to be identified. To help in their research, a composite photo of the Kern County Jane Doe and details on her Cree Nation origins were shared as part of a Facebook campaign by the DNA Doe Project. A family member recognized the photo, and after reading about her likely origins as a First Nations people, they knew exactly who it was. The woman, Violet Soucy, knew it was her aunt Shirley Ann Soucy. She had been searching for her for nearly 40 years. Violet said that her aunt was very meticulous and was a creature of habit. She would send them Christmas and birthday cards every year until 1980, when they suddenly stopped. Her grandmother told her that something must have happened and that they had to go and look for her. They searched hospitals, bars, parks, and graveyards over several years, but found nothing. When Violet's mother fell ill, she was ready to take a break from looking for her Aunt Shirley. But then, just a few days later, she saw the composite photo on Facebook. She then connected with the DNA Doe Project, and they were able to use her DNA and genetic genealogy to confirm a match. Violet had promised Shirley's biological mother that she'd keep looking for Shirley and bring her home, and she did. On April 23, 2021, during the Crimes Victims' Rights Week, the Kern County Sheriff's Coroner and the DNA Doe Project publicly announced they'd identified the Kern County Jane Doe as Shirley Ann Soucy. According to the DNA Doe Project, Shirley was one of the first Indigenous does to be identified using genetic genealogy. On the success of the case, Chief Coroner Ratliff said, "This is not about solving crime, although it may be a byproduct. This was about finding a family who had missed her, but did not know where to look." For now, the search for Ventura County's Jane Doe identity continues. According to the information given to law enforcement, the Ventura County Jane Doe was hitchhiking near the College of the Sequoias and was abducted in Visalia, California. The DNA Doe Project and law enforcement are hopeful that they'll soon be able to give her back her name. Susan Walsh.
I went to her house. I noticed that the door that was usually open was locked shut. The windows were locked shut, and it was 98 degrees out that day. And I rang the doorbell, nobody answered, nobody's car was there. In the pit of my stomach, I knew something had happened to her.
On July 16, 1996, 36-year-old Susan Walsh needed to make a phone call. Since she didn't have a phone, she planned to use a payphone a block away from her Nutley, New Jersey apartment, like she usually did. It was around noon when she left, and on her way out, she told her estranged husband, Mark Walsh, that she was stepping out. Mark lived in a connecting apartment to where Susan lived with their 12-year-old son, but Susan never returned. Mark reported her missing, and a day or two later, police searched her home. They didn't find anything indicating a crime had occurred there, and no one saw Susan leave her home or use the payphone that day. In fact, no outgoing calls were made from any other payphones near her apartment on the morning she went missing. There was one thing in the apartment that caught the attention of the police, though in her wall calendar, the month of July had been torn out. To Detective Lieutenant Stephen Rogers of the Nutley Police Department, the missing month is a mysterious clue in Susan's disappearance. "To me, that's significant," he said. "Did she have something planned on that someone didn't want us to see?" Susan had been juggling a lot in the months leading up to her disappearance. She was a freelance journalist for the New York Weekly, The Village Voice, and was working on her master's degree in writing at New York University. She also occasionally worked as an exotic dancer at the clubs around New Jersey for extra money, which she'd done on and off since college. According to Susan's father, she struggled to leave behind the easy money that came with dancing. Even though she aspired to be a full-time writer, she did it to earn some extra money and support her and her son. And it was also where she got a lot of information for her stories. One of her recent articles had garnered a lot of attention. It was an expose in the Village Voice about the Russian mob, who allegedly forced female immigrants to work in strip clubs for them. Susan's father, Floyd Merchant, believes the article opened up a threat to her. Friends say Susan was getting more and more paranoid, telling people she was being targeted by mobsters and stalkers. She believed 2 contracts had been taken out to kill her. She feared for her life and started drinking again after over a decade of sobriety and stopped taking the medication she was on to stabilize her mental health. The last time I met her, she was worried about someone having her killed. She was coming apart at the seams, said her father. Susan was also working as a researcher on the book titled Red Light: Inside the Sex Industry. The book was co-authored by her mentor at the Village Voice, James Ridgway, and focused on the corruption and criminal activity in the industry. She had also written an article for the Village Voice about the underground vampire scene in Manhattan. She was led to the story after she received a tip about blood going missing from NYC hospitals. Susan became immersed in the underground subculture, even reportedly dating a man who believed he was a vampire. She wrote a follow-up piece on the topic, but it was rejected because, according to Ridgway, Susan got totally absorbed with the vampire thing, the theories, the energy flows. Some suspect that her disappearance is related to the article and its subjects. However, there's no evidence to support that theory. In 1996, Susan was interviewed for a documentary about exotic dancers called Stripped. In the interview, she spoke about how she had become disenchanted by the industry. When her beeper goes off, she laughs and says, "It must be my stalker." Then her tone turns more serious as she says, "No, I do have a stalker." 2 days later, she went missing. Susan's father suspects that the police initially discredited Susan's case because she was an exotic dancer. At one point, police suspected that she left voluntarily. Her father never believed that theory, especially because she left everything behind. Her purse, pager, keys, medication, and most importantly, her son. He says Susan was a devoted mother who never would have abandoned her child. Stephen Rogers doesn't believe there's a connection between Susan's death and the mob story she published. However, foul play is suspected. Her estranged husband, Mark Walsh, was never considered a suspect in the case. Police say Susan's case has been especially difficult to investigate because so many people who were in her life when she went missing have either died or couldn't be reached. They're still searching for a person of interest who they believe have information about Susan's disappearance, and ask anyone with information to reach out to the Nutley Police Department in New Jersey. Noriko Tsuchide. November 24, 1998 was a long day of work for Noriko Tsuchide. The 24-year-old was an editing reporter for Isle Shima, a community magazine in Mie Prefecture, Japan. She had just returned from a trip to Thailand the day before and didn't leave the office until 11 p.m. Unfortunately, Noriko never made it home to her family. They started to worry and reported her missing when her car was discovered the next morning. It was located in a parking lot 1 kilometer from her work, but her bag and keys were nowhere to be found. Inside the car, police found cigarette butts, even though Noriko didn't smoke, and the driver's seat was pushed back, much further back than Noriko would typically have it set. The Mie Prefectural Police initially treated it as a runaway case, but her family believed she was a victim of foul play, and that she wouldn't have run off on her own accord. The police eventually opened an official investigation into Noriko's disappearance, and 80 police officers searched the area surrounding her work, which included a wooded area and a lake. Investigators also questioned approximately 700 people in connection to Noriko's disappearance, but they didn't establish any leads. A former detective said that he was suspicious of the case from the beginning. The parking lot where Noriko's car had been found belonged to an insurance company, and it wasn't where she usually parked. Her car was also parked diagonally, which he found strange. There was one person of interest identified in the case, a man who Noriko previously interviewed for the magazine. He'd called her 4 times the day she went missing. The man was questioned by police, and he admitted to seeing her on the night of November 24th. According to him, they'd met to discuss the previous interview. He picked her up, and they talked in his car, and then he dropped her off where her car was later found. But he said that he didn't know what happened to her after that. In 2008, rumors began to circulate that Noriko had been kidnapped and taken to North Korea. According to a government official, they had a source who specifically named Noriko as someone who may have been abducted and taken to the country. The May Prefectural Police then re-investigated her case to look into the claim. A government official said, "It's strange that a person from a third country would know the name of a person who is not designated as an abductee or a missing person." This claim has yet to be confirmed by police. For years, Noriko's family and friends would meet on the anniversary of her disappearance and distribute flyers with her photos in hopes that it would help them find her. Right now, it is still unknown how and why she disappeared 20 years ago. Jody Huisentruit.
It's been 22 years since a young anchor woman from Minnesota went missing. She was on her way to work when police believe she was attacked. Jody Huisentruit was last heard from on June 27, 1995. She overslept that morning for the early shift at her station in Mason City, Iowa, and got a call from her newsroom to check on her. Investigators believe someone grabbed Jody as she was headed to her car. Kate Raditz looks back on the search for her that's now been going on more than 2 decades.
For many residents of Mason City, Iowa, Jody Huisentruit was a familiar face. She was a news anchor for the KIMT TV, and they saw her almost every morning when she hosted the 6 o'clock morning news. But on June 27, 1995, she was running late. Typically, Jody would arrive at the station around 3 a.m., but by 4 a.m. there was no sign of Jody, so her producer, Amy Coons, gave her a call. Jody answered her phone. She had slept in but would be right there. Since she lived just 5 minutes away from the station, it wouldn't take her long. According to Amy, Jody seemed normal during their call. But when 5 a.m. hit and Jody still wasn't at work, Amy called again, but this time there was no answer. Instead, she anchored the 6 a.m. show herself and asked a coworker to call the police and request a welfare check on Jody. At 7:16 a.m., the police arrived at Jody's apartment complex and realized a crime had occurred in the parking lot. Jody's red Mazda Miata was still there, and there were signs of a struggle around it. They could see drag marks on the wet pavement, and they found her bent car key nearby along with her red high heels, blow dryer, and earrings. Search teams combed through the surrounding area, but didn't find anything else. Police believe Jody was abducted from a parking lot of her apartment between 4 and 4:30 a.m. There were no signs that Jody or her abductor entered her car, but they found a partial palm print on the vehicle. When police searched her apartment, they noticed the toilet seat was lifted, which suggested to them that a man was the last one to use it. While police were investigating the scene, Jody's friend, John Vasice, was walking by and started talking with the police. He told them that he saw Jody the night before. She had been at his house to watch a video of her surprise 27th birthday party, which he'd hosted for her earlier that month. He'd also spent the weekend prior with her and a few other friends water skiing in Iowa City. John was 22 years older than Jody, and although friends believed he was interested in her, she denied being romantically involved with him. When police asked him about his whereabouts that morning, John said that he was home and had his friend LaDonna call him around 6 a.m. to confirm their morning walk, which she confirmed. He provided a palm print and was given a polygraph test, though the results of both were never released. Police also interviewed Jody's neighbors, who reported hearing a scream around 4:30 a.m. Since the apartment complex was next to a busy campsite, the residents shrugged the scream off as noisy campers and didn't report it to the police. A neighbor also reported seeing a light-colored van in the apartment parking lot early that morning, but the vehicle was never discovered. The police also considered how Jody's job might have played a part in her disappearance, since she was in the public eye. On October 8th, she called the police after being followed by someone in a white truck while she was out for a run. She began taking self-defense classes and told her instructor that she thought she was being followed. The day before her disappearance, she was at an awards dinner at the Mason City Country Club. She talked with some guests and mentioned that she needed to change her phone number as she was getting nasty and naughty phone calls, but didn't share any further details about who they were from. With no solid evidence or leads, Jody's case went cold. On May of 2001, she was declared legally dead by a judge. On the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, her friends created Jody's Network of Hope, a nonprofit that hosts an annual golf tournament in Long Prairie to honor Jody and raise safety awareness. In 2020, drug kingpin Dustin Honkin, who was waiting execution for killing 5 people in the 90s, was suggested as a suspect. Some speculated that he and his accomplice, Angela Johnson, were involved in Jody's disappearance. Johnson previously worked at the Mason City Country Club as a server where Jody was seen the night before she went missing. Johnson stated that she wasn't working that night, which was corroborated by a server who knew Johnson and was working at the time. No evidence has been found to concretely connect Dustin Honkin or Angela Johnson to Jody's disappearance. In late 2020, a private investigator named Stephen Ridge announced that someone interviewed by police at the time of Jody's disappearance confessed to him that they destroyed potential key evidence in the case. He'd been in touch with federal authorities and had passed the information along to them in hopes that it was pivotal information they need to open the case. Though the informant and potential evidence has not been revealed, Ridge says,
I believe that this will continue to fuel an investigation that's going to result in an outcome here that in terms of identifying a perpetrator.
The Mason City Police Department is still currently investigating Jody's disappearance, with help from the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation and the FBI. Helen Karapetis. Helen was the third of 6 children to Theo and Vula Karapetis. The large family resided in Marrickville, Australia, a suburb just outside of Sydney. In the months before Helen's disappearance, Theo and Vula separated, and Vula had been granted full custody of all the children. On December 22, 1988, the children were all playing at a playground near their home. 10-year-old Helen played with a large group of neighborhood children and her siblings for most of the afternoon. Vula called her children in for supper around 5:30 p.m. Their home was close enough to the playground that the children could easily hear their mother calling them to come in. 5 of the 6 children returned, but there wasn't an immediate cause for concern. It was initially assumed that Helen had gone for supper at a neighbor's house and forgot to tell anyone. Although, when the sun went down and Helen hadn't returned, the family began searching for her. They began knocking on all of their neighbors' doors, and when they discovered Helen hadn't gone over to a friend's house, the police were called. Her siblings were confident that Helen had been with them as late as 5 p.m. No one remembered seeing anyone suspicious or out of the ordinary in the area, and it just seemed as if Helen had walked away from the group. The initial suspect was her father, Theo. At the time of his daughter's disappearance, Theo had been abusing alcohol and was known to be violent. It was also theorized that Helen had run away because of her father's abuse, but the family feels that this is unlikely, as it was very unlike Helen to run away. She was very close to her older sister Maria, and it didn't seem likely that she would run away without her. Investigators eventually concluded that Helen had been abducted, though there was no evidence to go on. There is still a $50,000 reward for any information on Helen. She would be 42 today. Michael Donaghy. In Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, 4-year-old Michael Donaghy was at a park with his parents. His mom was playing touch football with a local league, and his dad was spectating. Michael asked his mother Crystal if he could go to the playground. She said he could, but he was to wait for his dad to come.
I had told him not to go off with the kids that were there because I didn't know whose kids they were, and to watch out for the cars on his way back.
It was a Sunday. Bruce and Crystal Donaghy had brought their 2 children to a Victoria school football field. 4-year-old Michael disappeared.
Stood up here and looked over at the park. Didn't see him. I told Crystal I can't see Michael, so I'll go look for him.
He'd asked to go to a nearby playground while his mother played touch football. The playground was within sight of the field, within sight of his father and dozens of other adults. But Michael Donaghy simply disappeared.
She remembered watching him walk through the crowd for a few minutes. Michael was wearing a blue hooded jacket, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle t-shirt, rugby pants, and blue sneakers. His father went to meet Michael at the playground, but he couldn't find the 4-year-old. Michael's dad swiftly alerted those at the park, and a massive search began within minutes of Michael's disappearance. Around 50 people were in the neighborhood calling his name and knocking on doors. Police were also quickly alerted, and it was concluded that Michael hadn't simply wandered off. His disappearance sparked one of the most extensive police investigations in Canadian history. Over 11,000 tips had been received, and police had eyewitnesses say they saw an older man in his 40s or 50s near the park with a van, but the officers were never able to track down that man or the vehicle. The abductor would have only had about 5 minutes to snatch Michael and drive away. Michael would be 34 today, and there is still a $100,000 reward for any information on Michael. His family is still hopeful that someone will recognize him from his age progression photos. Brittany Ann Beers. In Sturgis, Michigan, 6-year-old Brittany Ann Beers was playing outside. At 7:30 p.m., she was riding her bike, and at 8:30 p.m., her mother left to run errands. Brittany's half-brother was supposed to be watching her, and he said he saw her sitting on a park bench about 5 minutes after their mother left. A witness who lived in the area told investigators he saw Brittany talking to an unidentified man in a red or brown mid-sized vehicle. Brittany then walked over to this witness and told him that she had made a new friend. She continued to play outside, and the witness left the area. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Brittany. Brittany's mother returned at around 9 p.m. and asked her son where Brittany was. They began searching, and shortly after 9, the authorities were called. Police located Brittany's bike that had been dumped near the area she had last been seen in. Sketches of the man Brittany had been talking to were also distributed. He was described as in his late 20s or early 30s with short dark hair, a thick mustache, and was driving either a mid-sized red car or a brown Renault. Police never located this man and described him as a person of interest that they wished to question.
I hollered for her and she didn't come, and she was usually the first one at the door when I hollered.
She had the bike, and she apparently rode the bike back from up by the roadway back over to the apartment complex by the apartment they lived in. So the bike was there.
She had dowels, she had this and that, but it was her bicycle. She didn't care about anything else but her bike.
So where was Brittany's family when she disappeared? Brittany didn't live with her father, Raymond Beers. He lived across town. He says he was at home. Brittany lived with her mom, Tina Stetler, in an apartment. Tina says she was at the store getting milk. Brittany's uncle, Jimmy Beers, was staying at the apartment. He is Raymond's brother, but at the time, he was also Tina's boyfriend. He says he was asleep inside.
I seen Josh outside the bedroom door, and I said, "What are you still doing up?" And he says, "Brittany's gone."
Tina told police she came home just after 9 and found Brittany missing. At 10:33, police were called.
We had tracking dogs down right away.
Brittany was said by neighbors to be frequently neglected, and people assumed she was often abused. Brittany was last seen wearing a white tank top with floral design, pink tie-dyed shorts, and white sneakers. She was missing 4 upper baby teeth at the time of her disappearance. A year following Brittany's disappearance, an older brother and younger sister were removed from their home, following abuse and neglect allegations. Her father, Raymond Beers, Uncle James Beers, and the father of one of her half-brothers, Kevin Folsom, were all accused of abusing the children, including Brittany. Folsom was arrested and charged for sexually abusing a minor, but was released in 2008. In 2000, her case had sparked media attention again when a man was arrested for child pornography possession, and in some of the photos there was a girl who resembled Brittany. It was later determined to be a girl from Texas who testified against her abusive parents and had them jailed. A woman who was a neighbor of Brittany said that she'd hoped that someone had discovered the abuse Brittany was experiencing and took her to give her a better life. Brittany would be 29 today. Number 3. Aaron Mitchell Anderson. In Pine City, Minnesota, Aaron Mitchell Anderson was a year old when he played in the backyard of his family's home. His mother had left him alone for a few moments, and when she came out, Aaron had vanished. The property bordered the Snake River and was next to a large embankment that led to the river. The police had assumed he had fallen in and drowned, even though his body was never recovered and the police dogs couldn't catch a scent anywhere near the river. The police themselves admitted to only exploring the drowning theory and ignored up to 20 other leads in the disappearance. An extensive search of the area was done several days after his disappearance, but Aaron was only a year old and couldn't have gotten far. Both of his parents firmly believe he was abducted. Aaron has a white birthmark on his lower abdomen and had an enlarged head as a child. He was last seen in a yellow and red sweatshirt with a puffy dinosaur on the front, light gray corduroy pants, a gray ski jacket, a white knit hat with green snowflakes and green ear flaps, brown plastic boots with nylon tops and liners, and gray socks. Aaron would be 33 years old today. When children go missing, it raises entire communities to rally together. There is always hope that there can be a positive outcome. There are cases today where abducted children return to their families, sometimes even decades later. These 4 cases covered are cold cases with very little evidence and no resolution for the families. There is always a hope that the right person will see videos like this one and a memory may be jogged or an odd conversation might be remembered, anything that could help resolve these cases. Michaela Bali. Michaela Bali was 16 at the time of her disappearance. Michaela was described as a shy and introverted teenager. The evening before her disappearance, she seemed distressed. She had asked a friend for a ride to the bank the following morning, and talking to another friend, she seemed upset over a boy. She seemed like a very lonely teenager. Although she had friends she went to school with, none of them seemed to really know what she did outside of school. Her friends knew she talked to people online, but didn't know any details about who she was talking to or if she was meeting people in person that she met online. Her mother said nothing was out of the ordinary that morning. They both got up, got ready for work together, and she was dropped off at the Sacred Heart High School by her grandmother around 8 a.m. Michaela checked into the school's Wi-Fi at 8:08 a.m. She was seen by the school's surveillance system to have left the property by 8:26 a.m. after putting her school things from her bag into her locker. Her ex-boyfriend sent her a text message asking her why she wasn't in her first class, and Michaela said she was on the other side of town. Upon leaving school, she walked to the nearest TD Bank. She arrived before it had opened, and she is seen waiting at the front. When it opened, she withdrew $55 from her account and headed to a pawn shop to try and sell a silver ring. The pawn shop owner recalled Michaela and said the ring had very little value and he didn't buy it from her. He also noted that she was quiet and didn't seem in distress. From the pawn shop, she headed south. Around 9 a.m., she entered a Tim Hortons restaurant and sat there while on her phone. She was likely there to use the Wi-Fi. She sat there for 13 minutes, continually glancing at the entrance behind her. She leaves the restaurant and surveillance captures her walking around the various stores, walking through parking lots, and at one point she had her phone to her ear and is talking into the phone. Her phone records showed no evidence of a call being made at the time, so it was likely she was using a third-party app like the FaceTime call feature, as she had no cell phone records matching a call at that time. When I was a teenager, I relied heavily on apps like Facebook, Skype, WhatsApp, to communicate, as I rarely had enough minutes on my phone to make calls. I remember frequently going to places like Tim Hortons or Starbucks just to use their Wi-Fi to message friends. She re-entered the same Tim Hortons restaurant at 9:55 a.m. She messaged a friend, "Hey, I need your help," but 20 minutes later, right before she left the restaurant, she messaged back saying, "Never mind, I figured it out." The friend didn't get either message until later that evening because she'd left her phone at home accidentally. While in the restaurant, Michaela asked a stranger to help her book a hotel room. The woman refused, not really giving Michaela much thought. Michaela had previously mentioned to friends that she wanted to go on a vacation to Regina, Saskatchewan. Other friends heard her mention Moose Jaw, Prince Albert, or Saskatoon, all larger cities nearest to the small community she lived in. Her friend said that Michaela would often talk about leaving town to get away to a big city, but they didn't pay much attention to her most recent ideas, as they assumed she was just dreaming. Michaela's friends said that she often made friends online using social media platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook. In the days prior to her disappearance, she had mentioned a friend was coming to meet her. All they knew about this person was that his name was Christopher. Michaela goes back to her school around noon, but is only there briefly. 12:03 p.m., she was seen on the school's surveillance system leaving the school, and when she rounds a corner, that was the last time she was captured on CCTV cameras. Her cell phone was either turned off or the battery died at 7 a.m. the next day. Since no cameras saw which direction she was walking in, it is assumed that she was picked up by someone. Michaela's grandmother arrived at the school at the end of the day to take Michaela to a violin lesson, and when she didn't come out of the school, Michaela's mother was called. Her mom immediately checked the slush fund she always kept in the house for emergencies. Michaela knew about this, and it was like a jar of money that was kept in the house. Her mom said it was completely untouched. Michaela also didn't take many belongings with her. Nothing really noticeable was taken, and the backpack she is seen carrying could only fit clothing for a couple days. In the months following her disappearance, some of the people she communicated with online were tracked down, but none of them were in the area at the time of her disappearance. Her mother, Paula Bali, remains hopeful that Michaela will one day be found. She doesn't believe her daughter had meant to leave for an extended amount of time and thinks she may have fallen victim to a human trafficking operation. If you have any information about Michaela Bali, please contact the Canadian RCMP. The family is offering a $25,000 reward for her safe return. Andrew Gosden. September 14th, 2007 seemed like any other day. The Gosden family was going through their usual morning routine in their Doncaster, South Yorkshire home. Glenys Gosden noted that her son Andrew had a difficult time waking up and seemed irritable. It wasn't initially thought of as anything more than typical teenager issues, but it was unusual for Andrew, as he was usually an early riser. The family consisted of Glenys and Kevin, who were the parents of 14-year-old Andrew and 16-year-old Charlotte. Andrew left the house at his usual time at 8:05 in his school uniform and headed in the direction of his bus stop. Andrew was only 8 days into the school year, and his parents were surprised to learn that in the days following his disappearance, he had stopped taking the school bus and was walking the 6.4 kilometers home instead. Andrew was small for his age. Although he was 14, he looked much younger than he was. He wore a strong prescription of glasses, he was deaf in one ear, and was described as quiet and shy. Andrew also had a unique double ridge on the inside of his right ear. Andrew was highly intelligent. He was in the Young, Gifted, and Talented program designed for the top 5% of students. Andrew didn't seem to really enjoy school. He felt it didn't challenge him. In the summer of 2006, he had attended a 2-week program at Lancaster University, and his parents noted that he was very excited to attend the program. He had a small group of friends at school, but his parents said that he didn't socialize outside of class. He would spend most of his time in his room listening to music, reading, and playing video games. His parents said they didn't notice any signs of depression or bullying, but Andrew spoke very little about school. That morning, although he headed in the direction of his bus stop, he didn't get on it. He went to a cash machine and withdrew £200 from his bank account and waited in the park until his parents and sister left the house to go to work. Andrew returned home and changed out of his school uniform. It was found later in the washing machine. He put on a black Slipknot t-shirt, black jeans, and packed his favorite book bag. He took with him his wallet, house keys, and a PSP, a portable PlayStation device. It was noted that he didn't take the £100 in cash that he had from his birthday in his room, the charger for his PSP, his passport, or a coat. By 8:30 a.m., Andrew left home. He was captured on a neighbor's CCTV footage headed down Littlemore Lane, back towards the park. He walked to the train station and bought a one-way ticket to London. The ticket seller remembered Andrew and noted that she had tried to sell him a round ticket, but he insisted on one way. It would only have been an extra £1 to get the round-trip ticket. Andrew boarded the train at 9:35 a.m. A woman who sat next to him on the train said she remembers him as being quiet and fully engrossed in playing a game on his PSP. Andrew arrived in London at 11:20 a.m. and CCTV captures footage of him leaving the King's Cross train station at 11:25. This was the last confirmed sighting of Andrew. The Gosden family didn't notice Andrew was missing at first. The school had attempted to notify his parents, but they called the wrong number to inform his parents that Andrew hadn't been at school that day. The Gosden family sat down for supper and assumed Andrew was in his room playing video games. When they finally noticed he wasn't there, his mother started calling his friends to locate him, and this was when she found out he hadn't been to school that day. It was around 7 p.m. when the police were called to report Andrew missing. They initially thought he had suffered an accident or, worse, was abducted. As his parents didn't believe he would have any reason to run away, an extensive search was undertaken of the area, and it took police 3 days to learn Andrew took a train to London, putting their searches in the wrong area. It was the person who had sold him the ticket that had called the tip line, and it took police 3 more weeks to find the CCTV footage of him leaving the train station. Andrew didn't have social media, and it was unlikely he went to London to meet someone. The only computer in the house that could connect to Wi-Fi was his sister's laptop, which Andrew didn't have access to. The computers at Andrew's school and the computers at the local library were also checked, but nothing related to Andrew was found. His PSP and his other video game console were also checked, and it doesn't appear that he had ever used the device features that he would have needed to talk to people. His sister said that Andrew had very little interest in connecting with people online. She said he just didn't seem social. The reason why Andrew wanted to go to London may have been to attend a concert. 30 Seconds to Mars was playing the day he disappeared, and there was also a local metal band that was playing a farewell show. The farewell show would be the last with the band's original vocalist, and the band had previously opened for larger bands like Slipknot. Andrew loved metal music, but Andrew's parents were unsure if he was a fan of either band. Both bands appealed to their fans to submit any photos taken from the concert to have police scan them for evidence of Andrew. Andrew's father also said that Andrew's favorite TV program was The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin, a story where the main character fakes his death and starts a new life. Andrew, however, didn't take enough belongings to take an extended journey. He didn't take clothing, a jacket, his chargers, or the remaining cash he had available. Throughout the years, there have been dozens of tips called into police, but nothing has led to the discovery of Andrew. In 2008, a year after his disappearance, a man went into the Leominster police station and used the intercom system to report a sighting of Andrew. The intercom system was used to replace staffed reception, and by the time an officer arrived, the man had left. The police made a public appeal for the man to come forward. A man later wrote to the BBC claiming to be the man, with details of a possible sighting in Shrewsbury. It wasn't confirmed that the man was the same, nor was Andrew found in Shrewsbury. Renewed hopes of finding Andrew came in 2018. The Gosden family revealed that someone had sent them an online conversation with an individual and an unknown person with the username Andy Rue. Andy Rue claimed that their boyfriend left them and that they needed £200 to cover rent. The person offered to send him money, but the user said that they didn't have a bank account as they had left home when they were 14. Rue is a nickname that was given to Andrew as a child. Gosden would be 27 now. He has been missing for over 13 years. His parents are desperate for his return, and should he or anyone who knows him sees this, they ask that he reaches out and lets him know that he's okay. Andrew is loved unconditionally and would be very welcomed home. Another gifted student went missing 10 months after Gosden, 16-year-old Alexander Slowly. There isn't a lot of information on his case. He disappeared from London, UK, failing to return home from a friend's house. Alexander had little money, no extra clothing, or a passport. He did have a cell phone, but it lost connection the day he went missing. Investigators believe the cases may have a link, but they aren't sure what that connection is. Alexander was last reported to have been around the King's Cross station, the same area where Andrew disappeared. Brandon Swanson. On May 14, 2008, in Marshall, Minnesota, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson was leaving his college following the end of the spring semester. It was just after midnight when he left the Minnesota West Community and Technical College campus. At 2 a.m., he called his parents on his cell phone, and he told them he'd crashed his car into a ditch and couldn't get it out. He said he was uninjured and was able to get out and was standing on the side of the road. He asked his parents if he could get picked up, and he told them he was located near Lloyd. He opted not to walk along the highway and instead was walking along a gravel dirt road. His parents set out, however, they were unable to find him or the vehicle. Brandon remained on the phone with them as they searched. Brandon said that he would flash his car lights, and his parents did the same on their vehicle, but neither saw flashing lights. Eventually, Brandon decides to leave his car and starts walking towards what he thinks is Lind. He told his dad to meet him at the parking lot of a local bar. His parents were driving to the bar that Brandon marked to go, hoping they would find Brandon walking along the road on the way. 47 minutes into the call, Brandon's parents heard him yell, "Oh shit," and after that, the call was disconnected. His parents called his phone over and over, and it continued to ring until the following day. Presumably, the battery died. Brandon's phone was never found. His parents continued searching but were unable to find him. At 6 in the morning, they called police to report him missing, but police told him they needed to wait to see if he would turn up. Because Brandon was 19, there wasn't any sense of urgency. They did pull his cell phone records, and the last location ping put him near Porter, 25 miles from where Brandon said he was. Following this, his car was located ditched near Taunton. From where Brandon said he was and from where his vehicle was found, it was in a completely opposite direction. It is unclear how he seemed to mix these two locations up. At the parties he attended that night, friends said that he was having alcoholic beverages, but they felt he hadn't drank that much, and he wasn't visibly intoxicated. His parents also stated that he didn't sound intoxicated or confused on the phone. His vehicle had no damage, it was just tipped at an angle that would require a tow to get him out. The grass and gravel along the road inhibited the police's ability to determine what direction the vehicle had come from. Police and volunteers searched for Brandon by ground, horseback, and by air. All-terrain vehicles were used to search the surrounding area, and sniffer dogs were deployed. Brandon had told his parents that when he was walking, he could see fences and he could hear rushing water nearby. He was walking along the Yellow Medicine River. The prevailing theory is that Brandon slipped and fell into the river, however, extensive searches never revealed a body. Another theory is that Brandon fell into the water, but was able to get out and walk, and then succumbed to hypothermia. Brandon's parents continue to leave their porch light on for him, hopeful that one day he will come home. In 2009, they spearheaded legislation that was signed into law. Brandon's law now requires police to make a report whenever a person of any age is reported missing, and an investigation must start immediately. Well, that is it for this video. As always, please give this video a thumbs up if you like the content, and subscribe for more if you haven't already. If you've done all that and want to support me in the channel, we have channel membership and Patreon to get early access, members-only content, and more. We also have merch and other goodies in the description box, as well as links to all my socials. But until then, I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.